Before Dumbledore, before Obi-Wan, hello there, before Doctor Strange, before Yen Sid, yes, that's the name of the sorcerer from Fantasia, it's Disney spelled backwards, before Gandalf, there was Merlin. The famed wizard from Arthurian legend can shapeshift, control the weather, predict the future, move megaliths, basically anything the heart desires or a plot requires. But is this robed, long-bearded, and occasionally pointy-hatted seer/enchanter/demon offspring and antichrist, we'll get into it, also a druid? According to Scottish journalist and scholar Lewis Spence, the answer is an unequivocal yes. And I quote, "Merlin is, in fact, the typical druid or wise man of Celtic tradition." End quote. As someone who's written extensively about druids over on irishmyths.com, I tend to agree with this assessment. From a purely historical standpoint, druids were intellectual elites who studied both natural and moral philosophy, and who used their extensive knowledge to settle disputes and advise Celtic chieftains. Indeed, writing in the 1st century CE, the Greek philosopher and orator Dio Chrysostom noted that the Druids were, quote, devoted to the prophetic art and to wisdom in general, end quote, and that kings were, quote, not permitted to do or plan anything without the assistance of these wise men, so that in truth it was they who ruled while the kings became their subordinates and instruments of their judgment. End quote. Turns out Merlin fits this description to a T. He is, of course, famous for being King Arthur's right-hand magic man, but more than that, Merlin is the one who sets King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table on their quest for the Holy Grail. And before that, it is Merlin who foretells the birth of Arthur's dastardly descendant Mordred and the fall of Arthur's kingdom. And before that, it is Merlin who sets up the whole Sword in the Stone contest that will establish Arthur's right to rule. And before that, it is Merlin who selects the original 50 Knights of the Round Table. And before that, it is Merlin who casts a spell that changes Arthur's father, Uther Pendragon's appearance, thus allowing him to beget Arthur in the first place. Oh right, and before that, it is Merlin who interprets a dragon-shaped comet as a sign that Uther will become king. And when that prophecy comes true, it sets all of the aforementioned events in motion. So yeah, in true druidic fashion, Merlin is really the one running the show at Camelot. Now, anyone familiar with the Ulster cycle of Irish mythology might have noticed some parallels between Merlin and the chief druid Cava, who famously is the right-hand magic man of the Ulster king Conor MacNessa. In Conor's court at Awen Macha, no one is allowed to speak to him, the king, lest he has spoken first, with the exception of Cava the Druid. When Cava is present, it is the king who must wait to speak. Thus, at Awen Macha, Cava is the one who is really running the show. A fact that is further evidenced by A. Cava playing a major role in getting Conhor conceived in the first place, B. Cava making a prophecy about the rise of Conhors and Ulsters and arguably all of Ireland's greatest champion, Cuchulainn, and C. Cava foretelling that the legendary beauty of Deirdre of the Sorrows would ultimately lead to the destruction of Conhor's kingdom, a prophecy that inevitably comes true. There's enough connective tissue here to make one wonder. Was the mythical magician Merlin based on the mythical druid Cava? Because there is a theory that Arthurian legend is essentially an offshoot or reimagining of Irish mythology's Ulster cycle. Look no further than the Green Knight for an example of this reimagination process in action. And there's an even wilder theory that suggests King Arthur and Cuchulainn are both manifestations of Halley's Comet. Of course, it's also possible that the Merlin myths and Cava myths are similar because both are rooted in Celtic lore. To quote British historian Peter Beresford Ellis, the fact that one can see relationships and counterparts demonstrates that Irish mythology is not a separate entity from the rest of the Celtic world. In it we find echoes of a common Celtic mythological, religious, and perhaps historical experience. End quote. And that leads us to another way of thinking about the "is Merlin a druid" question. Thus far we've focused on the fictional character of Merlin, but what about the historical or quasi-historical figures Merlin was based on? or any of them Druids. The consensus is that the Anglican bishop Geoffrey of Monmouth, who introduced Merlinus Ambrosius in his 12th century Prophetae Merlini, Prophecies of Merlin, based the character on two earlier figures. Ambrosius Aurelianus, a historical 5th century Romano-British military leader who famously fended off the invading Anglo-Saxons, and Myrddin Wyllt, i.e. Myrddin the Wyllt, a Welsh poet who fled a 6th century battle, sought refuge in a Scottish forest, and returned to civilization with the power of prophecy. It is that second figure, no doubt, who seems to have had the biggest influence on the creation of Merlin. And according to British historian Nikolai Tolstoy, quote, Myrddin was a pagan druid or bard surviving in a predominantly Christian age. Possibly in name and certainly in function, he was the chief druid, who presided over rituals necessary to preserve the harmony of the natural order. End quote. I mean, that pretty much settles it, right? By imbuing Merlin with Myrddin characteristics, Geoffrey of Monmouth effectively made his character a druid, even if it wasn't a deliberate choice. Indeed, it seems Geoffrey did his best to Christianize Merlin, explaining away what one could describe as Merlin's druidic abilities by making him a cambion, i.e. the offspring of a mortal woman and a demon. Such Christianization efforts would continue under the tutelage of the late 12th/early 13th century poet Robert de Boron, who, on top of the whole demon spawn angle, added that Merlin was on track to become the Antichrist until a priest intervened and baptized him. The only hiccup in this Myrddin was a druid, so Merlin is basically a druid too argument is that Myrddin, like Merlin, was most likely a fictional character. Or at best, he was quasi-historical. If Myrddin Wyllt had truly existed, there would likely be some poetry attributed to him, as is the case with the 6th century Brittonic bard Taliesin, who theoretically would have been Myrddin's contemporary. What's more, while Taliesin is included in the 9th century Historia Brittonum's list of the greatest Welsh poets, Myrddin is not. Now, Nikolai Tolstoy would counter that Christians destroyed all of Myrddin's poetry because of its pagan leanings, and that he doesn't appear in the Welsh poets list because he was actually Scottish. But modern scholars would counter that a lot of pagan-ish sounding Brittonic poetry was not destroyed, and if Myrddin was an actual Scottish poet and not a Welsh invention, why was his name derived from the Welsh place name Caerfyrddin? It is possible, however, that the character of Myrddin does have a Scottish connection insofar as he was based on the Scottish Lailoken, a 6th century battlefield fleeing forest dweller who, according to the 15th century tale Lailoken and Kentigern, was also called Merlinum. But when you consider that Lailoken has an Irish counterpart in the 7th century battlefield fleeing forest dweller Suibne Geilt, or Mad Sweeney, and that there are 3 other forest dwellers, Gall, Bulkan, and Miss, who allegedly fled the 3rd century Irish Battle of Ventry, it becomes clear that in all of these cases, what we're dealing with isn't pure history, but a folklore motif, specifically the Celtic wild man of the woods motif. Could this motif perhaps have been inspired by the behaviors of actual historical druids, who were known to convene in oak groves, and who would climb trees in order to cut down mistletoe, and whose very title druid can be translated as knower of the oak? Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, and one of the best things you can do is subscribe. That really helps. I've also got a few books you might be interested in. Might I recommend St. Patrick in Your Pocket? 20 Questions with the Apostle of Ireland. As always, my name is I.E. Kneverday, editor of the short story anthology Neon Druid, and creator of IrishMyths.com. Thanks for coming out. Hello there. Hello there. Hello there. Hello there.